The dog sat by the hospital door every day. When they saw who he waited for, all cried. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold as Dr. Elena Vasquez pulled into the parking lot of St. Francis Memorial Hospital. The exhaustion of a 12-hour night shift weighed heavily on her shoulders, but something else occupied her thoughts this morning. For the past week, she had noticed a peculiar visitor at the hospital's entrance, a medium-sized dog with caramel-colored fur and soulful brown eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of an ancient being. Elena stepped out of her car, her joints stiff from the long night of attending to patients. The cool morning air filled her lungs as she stretched, glancing toward the hospital entrance. Right on schedule, there he was, the mysterious dog, sitting with perfect posture near the sliding glass doors. He wasn't mangy or underfed like most strays. His coat, though slightly dirty, maintained a certain sheen that suggested he hadn't been homeless for long. "He's back again," said Marcus, one of the security guards, approaching Elena with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed one to her with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "This is the 8th day straight. Like clockwork, he shows up at 6:30 a.m. and stays until nightfall." Elena accepted the coffee gratefully, her eyes never leaving the dog. "Has anyone checked if he has a microchip? Surely he belongs to someone." "Animal control came by yesterday. No chip, no collar, nothing. They tried to take him, but—" Marcus paused, shaking his head. "You should have seen it, Doc. The most heartbreaking whining I've ever heard. He kept trying to get back to the entrance. Eventually, the officer just gave up and said they'd come back another day." Elena sipped her coffee thoughtfully. There was something about the dog's demeanor that struck her as unusual. He didn't approach people for food or attention. He simply sat there watching the entrance, occasionally rising to inspect someone entering the hospital before returning to his vigilant post, with what Elena could only describe as disappointment in his eyes. "Has he tried to go inside?" she asked. "A couple of times," Marcus replied. "Hospital policy, you know. I had to shoo him away, but he never gets aggressive. Just gives you this look that makes you feel like you've committed some terrible sin." He chuckled, but Elena could hear the concern underneath. Elena finished her coffee and decided to approach the dog before heading home. As she walked closer, the animal's ears perked up and his tail gave a tentative wag. Unlike most strays, he didn't cower or show signs of fear. Instead, he rose to his feet with dignity, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Hey there, buddy," she said softly, crouching a few feet away and extending her hand. "What are you looking for?" The dog approached cautiously, sniffed her hand, and then did something unexpected. He looked straight into her eyes, then turned his gaze toward the hospital entrance before looking back at her. The gesture was so deliberate that Elena felt a chill. It was almost as if he was trying to communicate something. "You want to go inside?" she asked, feeling slightly foolish for talking to the dog as if he could understand. To her amazement, the dog's tail wagged more vigorously and he took a step toward the entrance. "I'm sorry, boy. Pets aren't allowed in the hospital unless they're service animals," she explained gently. The dog sat down, his eyes never leaving hers. There was such profound sadness in those brown depths that Elena felt her heart constrict. After a moment, he turned back to face the entrance, resuming his watch. Elena reluctantly left him there, her mind troubled by the encounter as she drove home to her empty apartment. Since her divorce 2 years ago, she had thrown herself into her work, taking extra shifts and volunteering for the most challenging cases. The loneliness of her personal life was something she had learned to accept, filling the void with the satisfaction of saving lives. But something about that dog nagged at her. His behavior wasn't random, it felt purposeful. That evening, unable to sleep despite her exhaustion, Elena found herself searching online for stories about dogs waiting at hospitals. She discovered numerous accounts of canine loyalty. dogs waiting for deceased owners, dogs finding their way to hospitals where their humans were being treated. The more she read, the more convinced she became that the mysterious visitor at St. Francis was there for a reason. When Elena returned for her shift the next evening, she immediately looked for the dog, but he was gone. A pang of disappointment surprised her. "He left about an hour ago," Marcus informed her, noticing her searching gaze. "Same as every day. Comes at dawn, leaves at dusk. Never makes a fuss." Throughout her shift, Elena found her thoughts returning to the dog. Between attending to patients and coordinating with other staff members, she made time to inquire if anyone knew anything about him. A few nurses had noticed him, and one elderly volunteer mentioned feeding him occasionally, but nobody knew where he came from or why he maintained his daily vigil. As dawn approached and Elena's shift neared its end, she decided to take a more proactive approach. She stopped by the hospital's administrative office and reviewed recent patient admissions, focusing on those who might have had a connection to the dog. It was a long shot, but something compelled her to try. The list was extensive, and after an hour of searching, Elena had nothing to show for her efforts. She was about to give up when her eye caught a detail in a patient's file from approximately 2 months ago. David Chen, 78, admitted following a severe stroke. The notes mentioned that he had repeatedly asked about his dog during his brief periods of consciousness. Elena's heart began to race as she read further. Mr. Chen had no family listed as next of kin, only emergency contact information for a neighbor. Checking the time, Elena saw that it was already past 6:30 a.m. The dog would be at his post by now. Rushing to the entrance, she felt a surge of relief at seeing the familiar caramel fur. The dog recognized her immediately, rising to his feet with an expectant look. "Come on, boy," she said, making a quick decision. "Let's see if we can solve this mystery." Elena led the dog to her car, half expecting him to resist, but he jumped into the passenger seat as if he'd been waiting for this invitation all along. The address in Mr. Chen's file was for an apartment building about 20 minutes from the hospital. As they drove, the dog sat alert, occasionally looking at Elena with what she could only interpret as gratitude. The apartment complex was modest but well maintained. Elena found the superintendent, a middle-aged man named Ray, who recognized the dog immediately. "That's Max," he exclaimed. "Old Mr. Chen's dog. Haven't seen him in weeks. Thought maybe the shelter took him." "Do you know what happened to Mr. Chen?" Elena asked. Ray's face fell. "Had a stroke right in the garden out back. I was the one who called the ambulance. Max wouldn't leave his side. Had to lock him in my office when the paramedics came." He reached down to pat the dog's head. "After that, he disappeared. Broke right through my screen door. I looked everywhere, but eventually had to give up. Poor guy." "Mr. Chen was taken to St. Francis," Elena explained. "I think Max has been waiting for him all this time." The superintendent's eyes widened. 2 months? He's been going there every day for 2 months? Elena nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "Do you know if Mr. Chen had any family? The hospital records don't show anyone." "None that ever visited," Ray replied. "Just him and Max for the 5 years they lived here. That dog was his whole world. Rescued him from the shelter when he was already old. Said they were 2 old-timers keeping each other company." "What happened to Mr. Chen's apartment?" Elena asked. "Had to clear it out last month. No rent coming in, you know. His things are in storage until someone claims them, though there wasn't much." Elena thanked Ray for the information and returned to her car, Max following obediently. As she sat behind the wheel, the weight of the situation settled on her shoulders. How could she tell a dog that the person he was waiting for was never coming back? The hospital records showed that David Chen had been transferred to a long-term care facility called Sunset Gardens after spending 3 weeks in intensive care. His prognosis had been poor. Severe brain damage from the stroke left him unresponsive most of the time. Elena made a decision. "Let's go see him, Max. Would you like that?" The dog's response was immediate. An excited whine and vigorous tail wagging that spoke volumes. It was as if he had understood every word. As they drove toward Sunset Gardens, Elena's mind raced with questions. How would the facility react to her bringing a dog? What if Mr. Chen's condition had deteriorated further? What would she do with Max afterward? She had no answers, only a conviction that she was doing the right thing. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the road as Elena drove toward an encounter that would change multiple lives forever. In the passenger seat, Max sat with renewed purpose, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, as if he could already sense that his long wait was finally coming to an end. Sunset Gardens was a sprawling single-story facility surrounded by carefully manicured lawns and flowering gardens that lived up to its serene name. Elena parked her car in the visitor's lot, then turned to Max, who was already standing alert, his paws on the dashboard as he surveyed their destination. "I need you to be on your best behavior," she told him, reaching for her hospital ID badge. "I'm going to try something that might not work, but it's worth a shot." Max responded with a soft whine that Elena took as agreement. She attached a spare lanyard to his collar, creating a makeshift leash, and clipped her hospital ID to his neck. It wasn't a proper therapy dog certification, but from a distance, it might pass as official enough to get them through the door. The reception area of Sunset Gardens was bright and welcoming, with comfortable seating and soft music playing in the background. At the front desk, a young woman with a name tag reading Sophie greeted Elena with a professional smile that faltered slightly when she noticed Max. "Good morning," Elena said confidently. "I'm Dr. Vasquez from St. Francis Memorial. This is Max, one of our therapy dogs. We're here to see David Chen." Sophie hesitated, her eyes moving from Elena's ID badge to the one hanging from Max's collar. "I don't see any scheduled therapy visits on today's calendar." Elena maintained her composure. "This is a special case. Mr. Chen was my patient at St. Francis before his transfer. We've been conducting a study on the effects of animal therapy on stroke recovery, and Mr. Chen was one of our participants. I'm just following up." The lie made Elena's stomach twist, but she pushed the guilt aside. Sometimes rules needed to be bent for the right reasons. After a moment's consideration, Sophie nodded. "Mr. Chen is in room 115, down the east wing. I'll need you to sign in, please." Elena quickly filled out the visitor's log, conscious of Max's growing excitement beside her. The dog seemed to sense they were getting closer to his owner, his tail wagging with increasing enthusiasm. As they walked down the corridor, Elena noticed the respectful way staff members nodded at her, giving Max curious but approving glances. The ruse was working, but more importantly, Max was behaving perfectly, walking calmly at her side, no barking, no pulling on his makeshift leash. Room 115 was at the end of a quiet hallway. The door was partially open, and Elena could hear the soft beeping of monitoring equipment from within. She knocked gently before pushing the door wider. The room was small but private, with a window overlooking one of the gardens. In the hospital bed lay an elderly Asian man, his thin frame barely making an impression under the covers. His eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but steady. Various tubes and wires connected him to machines that tracked his vital signs. Max froze at the threshold, his body suddenly tense. A soft whimper escaped him as he stared at the motionless figure in the bed. "It's okay," Elena whispered, her heart breaking for the dog's obvious distress. "You can go to him." As if released from a spell, Max padded quietly into the room, approaching the bed with caution. He sniffed the air, then gently placed his front paws on the edge of the mattress, bringing his nose close to the old man's hand. David Chen didn't stir, but the monitors showed a slight increase in his heart rate. Max whined softly, nudging his owner's limp fingers with his nose. "Mr. Chen," Elena called gently, moving to the other side of the bed. "Mr. Chen, you have a visitor." There was no response, but Elena hadn't really expected one. According to his records, David Chen rarely showed signs of consciousness. His stroke had affected the areas of his brain responsible for speech and movement. The prognosis for recovery was minimal. Max settled down on the floor beside the bed, his chin resting on his paws, eyes fixed on his owner's face. The devotion in that gaze made Elena's throat tighten with emotion. "He comes to the hospital every day looking for you," she told the unresponsive man. "Every single day since you were taken away in the ambulance. He's been waiting for you to come back." A noise at the door made Elena turn. A middle-aged nurse with kind eyes and gray-streaked hair stood watching them. "I'm Nurse Patel," she said. "I'm Mr. Chen's primary caregiver." Elena quickly repeated her story about the therapy dog study, but Nurse Patel waved it away with a knowing smile. "You don't need to explain. I've been caring for David for 6 weeks now, and this is the first time I've seen any change in his vitals when someone visits." She nodded toward the monitors. His heart rate increased the moment that dog walked in. That's not coincidence. Relief washed over Elena. "This is Max, Mr. Chen's dog. He's been coming to St. Francis every day, waiting for his owner to return. I just found out today where Mr. Chen had been transferred." Nurse Patel's eyes softened as she looked at Max, still maintaining his vigil by the bed. "I've been working with stroke patients for 20 years, Dr. Vasquez. Never underestimate the power of connection. The brain may be damaged, but the heart remembers." She approached the bed and checked Mr. Chen's vital signs manually, nodding with satisfaction. "Would you like to stay a while? I can bring some water for Max." "That would be wonderful, thank you," Elena replied. After Nurse Patel left, Elena pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was after her night shift. Max remained motionless except for his eyes, which occasionally moved from his owner's face to Elena, as if checking that she was still there. "You're quite the devoted friend, aren't you?" Elena murmured. Minutes stretched into an hour. Elena found herself talking softly to the unresponsive man, telling him about his faithful dog, about the hospital where she worked, about anything that came to mind. It felt right somehow, filling the silence with gentle conversation. Nurse Patel returned with water for Max and coffee for Elena, then left them alone again. Elena was in the middle of describing her own dog from childhood when she noticed a subtle change. David Chen's fingers, the ones closest to where Max had rested his head, twitched slightly. "Mr. Chen," she called, leaning forward, "can you hear me?" The movement came again, more pronounced this time. Max noticed it too, rising to his feet with ears alert. He gave an excited whine, his tail beginning to wag. "Mr. Chen, if you can hear me, try to move your fingers again," Elena encouraged, her medical training kicking in as she assessed for deliberate response versus random nerve firing. The elderly man's eyelids fluttered and his fingers definitely curled inward, a small movement, but unmistakably intentional. Max barked once softly, as if in encouragement. Nurse Patel appeared at the door, drawn by the sound. "What's happening?" "He's responding," Elena said, unable to keep the excitement from her voice. He moved his fingers and his eyelids fluttered. The nurse quickly moved to check his vitals again, her experienced hands efficient. Heart rate elevated, blood pressure up slightly, but in a good way. These are response indicators. Max had now placed his head directly under Mr. Chen's hand, positioning himself so that the limp fingers rested on his fur. The contact seemed to trigger something because the old man's fingers began to move again, weakly stroking the dog's head. "David," Nurse Patel called, louder than Elena had. "David, can you open your eyes? Your dog is here. Max is here." At the sound of his name, Max gave another soft bark. And then slowly, David Chen's eyes opened. They were cloudy with confusion at first, wandering around the room until they settled on the dog beside him. Recognition dawned gradually, along with something else. Joy, breaking through the paralysis of his features like sunlight through clouds. "Oh my goodness," Nurse Patel whispered. I need to get the doctor." She hurried from the room, leaving Elena witnessing a reunion that transcended words. Tears filled her eyes as she watched Max gently lick the old man's hand, his tail wagging furiously now. David Chen couldn't speak, couldn't move much beyond those fingers that continued their weak caress of his dog's fur, but his eyes said everything: the love, the recognition, the gratitude. Elena had seen many moving moments in her medical career: lives saved against impossible odds, families reunited after close calls, the miracle of new life coming into the world. But something about this simple connection between an old man and his faithful dog touched her more deeply than anything she had experienced before. In that moment, watching Max's patient devotion rewarded with his owner's recognition, Elena felt something shift inside her. The protective walls she had built around her heart since her divorce began to crack, letting in emotions she had kept at bay for too long. Dr. Lawrence Reed, the neurologist in charge of David Chen's case, stood at the foot of the bed reviewing the patient's chart with an expression of guarded amazement. His white coat was impeccably pressed, contrasting with the slightly disheveled appearance of someone who had been called in unexpectedly on his day off. "In 30 years of practice, I've never seen anything quite like this," he admitted, glancing at Max, who had refused to leave his owner's side. The dog now lay on a blanket Nurse Patel had placed next to the bed, his chin resting protectively on the mattress edge. From minimal responsiveness to conscious recognition in a matter of hours, it defies the progression patterns we typically see in severe stroke cases. Elena, who had been persuaded to stay by Nurse Patel despite her exhaustion, nodded. The power of emotional connection shouldn't be underestimated. There are studies suggesting that familiar stimuli, voices, smells, touch, can activate neural pathways that remain intact after brain injuries. Dr. Reed smiled slightly. "You don't need to convince me, Dr. Vasquez. I'm witnessing the evidence firsthand." He moved closer to David Chen, who was now sleeping peacefully, his hand still extended toward Max. "What I'm trying to determine is how we can incorporate this obvious beneficial connection into his care plan." The words hung in the air, highlighting the problem that Elena had been avoiding since their arrival. What would happen to Max now? The dog couldn't stay at the facility permanently, not without proper certification and approval. But sending him back to wait futilely at the hospital seemed unbearably cruel. "There must be some accommodation we can make," Nurse Patel suggested, voicing Elena's thoughts. "Perhaps a regular visitation schedule? I can't imagine separating them again, not after seeing this response." Dr. Reed considered this, tapping his pen thoughtfully against the chart. "Let me speak with administration. This is an unusual situation, but given the clear therapeutic benefit," he trailed off, then addressed Elena directly. "In the meantime, I understand you brought Max here today. What are your plans for him?" The question caught Elena off guard. In the excitement of the reunion and Mr. Chen's unexpected response, she hadn't thought beyond the immediate moment. I'm not sure," she admitted. "I couldn't just leave him at the hospital entrance anymore, not knowing what he was waiting for. But I haven't really considered the logistics." "He can't go back to Mr. Chen's apartment," Nurse Patel added. The superintendent said it's been cleared out. A heavy silence fell over the room, broken only by the soft sound of Max's breathing as he maintained his protective watch. "I could take him," Elena heard herself say, surprising even herself with the offer. Temporarily, at least, until we figure out a more permanent arrangement. Dr. Reed nodded approvingly. That would be helpful. We'll need a few days to work out the details with administration. Perhaps by then, we'll have a clearer picture of Mr. Chen's potential for further recovery as well. After discussing some additional medical details and arranging for Elena to return with Max in 2 days, Dr. Reed and Nurse Patel left the room. Elena found herself alone with the sleeping patient and his faithful companion, wondering how she had managed to adopt a dog in the span of a single morning. "Looks like you're coming home with me, buddy," she said softly to Max, who glanced up at her with those soulful brown eyes before returning his attention to his owner. "Just for a little while until we sort this out." Leaving proved to be more challenging than anticipated. When Elena finally indicated it was time to go, Max resisted, planting himself firmly beside the bed with a determination that spoke volumes. It took gentle coaxing and finally a direct appeal from Nurse Patel for the dog to reluctantly follow Elena from the room, his backward glances at his sleeping owner nearly breaking her heart. "We'll come back soon, I promise," Elena assured him as they walked slowly down the corridor. "He's not alone anymore. They'll take good care of him." The drive to Elena's apartment was quiet, Max sitting in the passenger seat with an air of dignified melancholy that seemed at odds with his canine nature. Occasionally, he would look at Elena as if assessing her trustworthiness before turning his gaze back to the road. Elena's apartment wasn't prepared for a canine visitor. She lived on the 3rd floor of a converted Victorian house in a neighborhood not far from the hospital, convenient for her work schedule but lacking in outdoor space. Pets were allowed according to her lease, but she'd never considered getting one, telling herself she worked too many hours to properly care for an animal. As she unlocked her door, Elena suddenly saw her living space through new eyes, the minimalist furniture chosen more for function than comfort, the bare walls devoid of personal photographs, the general sense of a place used for sleeping and little else. It struck her that her apartment reflected the emotional state she'd maintained since her divorce, functional but joyless, existing rather than living. Max entered cautiously, sniffing the unfamiliar territory with careful deliberation. Elena watched as he methodically explored each room, his nails clicking on the hardwood floors. The exploration complete, he returned to her, his expression almost quizzical. "I know it's not much of a home," she said, feeling oddly compelled to explain herself to the dog. "I'm not here much, and when I am, I'm usually sleeping between shifts." Max tilted his head, then padded over to the couch and jumped up, settling himself with a deep sigh. The sight of him there, a living being making himself comfortable in her sterile space, created a lump in Elena's throat. "You must be hungry," she realized, mentally cataloging the meager contents of her refrigerator. "Let me see what I can find." A quick inventory revealed little that seemed appropriate for canine consumption. Elena made a mental note to stop by a pet store later after she'd had some sleep. For now, she managed to put together a makeshift meal of plain rice left over from a takeout order and some diced chicken breast. Max ate politely but without enthusiasm, his mind clearly elsewhere. When he finished, he returned to the couch and resumed his vigilant pose, eyes fixed on the door, as if expecting someone to walk through it at any moment. "He's safe, Max," Elena told him gently, "and we'll go back to see him soon." The exhaustion of being awake for over 24 hours was finally catching up with her. Elena took a quick shower, changed into comfortable clothes, and prepared for some much-needed sleep. When she emerged from the bathroom, she found Max had moved from the couch to the floor beside her bed, curled up in a tight ball. "Good idea," she murmured, collapsing onto the mattress. "We both need rest." Sleep claimed her almost instantly, pulling her into deep, dreamless unconsciousness that came from physical and emotional depletion. She didn't stir until late afternoon, when the slanting rays of the setting sun streamed through her bedroom window. For a moment, Elena was disoriented, trying to remember why she felt as if something significant had changed. Then she heard the soft sound of breathing from beside her bed, and memory rushed back. The dog at the hospital, the discovery of his owner, the emotional reunion she had witnessed. She leaned over to check on Max, only to find he wasn't there. Panic gripped her briefly until she spotted him sitting by the apartment door, his posture alert and expectant. "How long have you been waiting there?" she asked, sliding out of bed. Max turned to look at her, then back at the door, his message clear. It was time to go back to his real owner. "We can't go back today, boy," Elena explained, feeling oddly guilty. "We'll go tomorrow, I promise. Dr. Reed needs time to arrange things." The dog's disappointment was palpable, his shoulders slumping slightly as he reluctantly moved away from the door. Elena's heart ached for him. How could she explain the complexities of human rules and medical protocols to a creature whose understanding of loyalty was so pure and uncomplicated? "Let's get you some proper food and supplies," she suggested, reaching for her phone to check the operating hours of the nearest pet store. "Make you more comfortable while you're staying with me." The trip to the pet store turned into an education for Elena. She had never realized the overwhelming array of options available for pet care, different foods based on age and health needs, beds in various styles and sizes, toys, treats, grooming supplies. The helpful store clerk, noting her obvious inexperience and Max's dignified presence, guided her through the essentials. "How long have you had him?" the young woman asked, as she recommended a specific brand of senior dog food. "He's not actually mine," Elena replied, then found herself explaining the extraordinary situation. The clerk listened with increasing amazement. "That's incredible," she said when Elena finished. "Talk about loyalty. You hear stories like that, but to actually see it happening." "I know," Elena agreed, watching Max patiently sitting beside her shopping cart. "It's changed how I see, well, everything really." And it had, she realized as they drove home with the car full of supplies. In less than 24 hours, her carefully ordered life had been disrupted in the most unexpected way, forcing her to confront emotions and truths she had been avoiding for years. Max had shown her what real devotion looked like. Not the fragile human promises that could be broken by time and circumstance, but something deeper and more fundamental. A connection that transcended words, that persisted against all odds, that found its way home despite every obstacle. That evening, Elena found herself engaged in an unexpected ritual, setting up a proper living space for Max in her apartment. She arranged the plush dog bed in the corner of her living room, positioned water and food bowls in the kitchen, and organized his new toys and treats in a wicker basket she normally used for medical journals. Max observed these preparations with polite interest, but seemed most captivated by Elena herself. He followed her from room to room, his eyes tracking her movements with an intensity that was almost unnerving. It was as if, having lost track of one human he cared about, he was determined not to let another one disappear. "I'm not going anywhere," she assured him, kneeling to ruffle the fur behind his ears. "At least not until tomorrow morning, when we go see Mr. Chen again." At the mention of his owner's name, Max's ears perked up and his tail gave a hopeful wag. Elena made a mental note to be careful about using Mr. Chen's name unless they were actually heading to visit him. After dinner, a proper meal for Max from his new senior dog food and reheated leftovers for Elena, they settled in the living room. Elena turned on the television, more for background noise than entertainment, and began reviewing some medical journals she'd been neglecting. Max initially sat on his new bed, but after a few minutes he quietly moved to the couch and settled beside her, his warm presence oddly comforting. "Is this allowed?" Elena asked with mock seriousness. "Are we already breaking the rules?" Max responded by resting his head on her lap, his eyes drifting closed as she absently stroked his fur. The simple act of petting a dog, something Elena hadn't done in years, released a tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. The repetitive motion was almost meditative, allowing her mind to wander and process the extraordinary events of the day. Her phone chimed with a text message from Nurse Patel. David had a good afternoon, more finger movement, and tried to form words. Dr. Reed very encouraged. See you tomorrow. Elena showed the message to Max. Good news, buddy. He's doing better. The dog raised his head, as if understanding the importance of the communication, then settled back down with a contented sigh. Elena continued stroking his soft fur, marveling at how naturally they had fallen into this companionship despite knowing each other less than a day. Later, as she prepared for bed, Elena found herself talking to Max about her life, her childhood dream of becoming a doctor, her failed marriage to another physician who had chosen career advancement over their relationship, her subsequent retreat into work as a shield against further emotional pain. There was something therapeutic about voicing these thoughts to a listener who offered no judgment, only attentive ears and occasional head tilts. I've been hiding, she admitted as she turned out the lights, using my job as an excuse to avoid really living. Max followed her to the bedroom, settling on the floor beside her bed despite the new dog bed in the living room. Maybe that's why your story hit me so hard. You never gave up, never stopped looking, even when it seemed hopeless. In the darkness, Elena listened to Max's steady breathing, finding unexpected comfort in the simple sound of another living being sharing her space. For the first time in years, her apartment didn't feel empty. Morning came with the insistent buzz of Elena's alarm. She had set it early to allow time for walking Max before their visit to Sunset Gardens. The dog was already alert, watching her with expectant eyes as she rolled out of bed. Give me 5 minutes to become human, she told him, heading for the bathroom. Walking a dog around her neighborhood gave Elena a new perspective on streets she had traveled countless times. Max moved with purpose, investigating scents and sounds that remained invisible to human senses. He was well behaved on the leash, further evidence of Mr. Chen's careful training, and seemed to enjoy the morning air despite his obvious eagerness to get to their main destination. Several neighbors Elena barely knew greeted her warmly, using Max as a conversation opener. An elderly woman she had passed for years without more than a nod stopped to chat about her own dog, commenting on Max's beautiful coat and dignified demeanor. A young couple with a stroller admired him from a respectful distance, their baby reaching out with delighted squeals. You're quite the social facilitator, Elena told Max as they made their way back to the apartment. I've lived here 3 years and spoken to more neighbors this morning than in all that time combined. After a quick breakfast for both of them, Elena gathered Max's makeshift therapy dog credentials and they set off for Sunset Gardens. In the car, Max sat more alertly than the previous day, his anticipation palpable as they drove. When they pulled into the facility's parking lot, he gave a soft whine of recognition. Yes, we're back, Elena confirmed. Let's go see him. The reception desk was staffed by a different person today, but Nurse Patel had evidently prepared the way for them. The young man smiled and waved them through without questions, even offering Max a small treat from a jar on the counter. Room 115, right? He confirmed. Mr. Chen has been asking for his dog all morning. Well, in his way. Elena's heart lifted at this news. He's communicating more? From what I hear, yes. Dr. Reed is with him now. As they approached room 115, Elena could hear voices inside. Dr. Reed's professional tone and another voice she didn't recognize. Max quickened his pace, pulling slightly on the leash in his eagerness to reach his owner. When they entered, Elena was surprised to see a younger man standing beside Dr. Reed at the foot of the bed. He had David Chen's same high cheekbones and thoughtful eyes, though his business suit and carefully styled hair contrasted sharply with the elderly man's hospital-pale appearance. Ah, here they are, Dr. Reed said, turning toward the door. Dr. Vasquez, this is James Chen, David's son. Nephew, actually, the younger man corrected, stepping forward to shake Elena's hand. His grip was firm, his smile professional but reserved. Uncle David never married or had children. I'm his closest living relative. Max had already moved to the bedside, his whole body wiggling with joy as David Chen extended a trembling hand to touch his fur. The improvement in the elderly man's condition was remarkable. He was sitting up against pillows, his eyes clear and focused, though the left side of his face still drooped from the stroke's damage. Max, he managed to say, the words slurred but unmistakable. Dr. Reed beamed like a proud parent. That's the first clear word he's spoken since his admission. We were just discussing the remarkable progress he's made since yesterday. James Chen looked between his uncle and the dog with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. Surprise mingled with something else. Concern. Calculation. He cleared his throat. I should explain my absence. I've been overseas on business for the past 3 months. The hospital had my contact information, but with the time difference and my traveling schedule. He trailed off, his discomfort evident. I only received the messages about Uncle David's condition when I returned to the States yesterday. Elena nodded, keeping her expression neutral, though questions swirled in her mind. 3 months was a long time to be unreachable, even allowing for international business commitments. And if James was David's closest relative, why hadn't the apartment superintendent mentioned him? The important thing is that you're here now, Dr. Reed said diplomatically, and just in time to witness what might be a remarkable recovery. I was just explaining to Mr. Chen how his uncle's responsiveness has increased dramatically since being reunited with his dog. James glanced at Max again, his expression softening slightly. Uncle David rescued him from a shelter about 5 years ago. I thought it was a mistake, an elderly man taking on the responsibility of a dog, but they seemed to get along well enough the few times I visited. The phrasing struck Elena as odd. Few times suggested a relationship that was more distant than one might expect between an elderly uncle and his only living relative. Max has been coming to St. Francis Hospital every day since Mr. Chen's stroke, Elena explained, waiting for him to return. James raised his eyebrows. Every day? For 2 months? Without fail, Elena confirmed. That's how I found out about your uncle. I work at St. Francis, and Max's behavior made me curious enough to investigate. On the bed, David Chen was slowly but deliberately stroking Max's head, his face transformed by an expression of pure contentment. The dog had rested his chin on the mattress, eyes half closed in bliss at being reunited with his beloved owner. Well, James said, straightening his already immaculate tie, this presents some logistical issues we need to address. I've been meeting with the facility administrators about Uncle David's continuing care, and unfortunately, they're quite firm about their no pets policy. Dr. Reed frowned. I've been discussing potential exceptions with them, given the clear therapeutic benefit. They're concerned about liability, allergies, and the precedent it would set. James interrupted smoothly. Understandable from a management perspective. Elena felt a knot forming in her stomach. There was something in James Chen's tone that suggested he wasn't particularly invested in finding a solution that would keep Max and his uncle together. Dr. Reed's professional demeanor couldn't quite mask his frustration as he responded to James Chen. With all due respect, Mr. Chen, your uncle has shown more progress in the past 24 hours than in the 6 weeks since his admission. As his physician, I have to advocate for what's clearly beneficial to his recovery. James gave a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. I appreciate your medical opinion, doctor. However, as his legal power of attorney, I need to consider all aspects of my uncle's care, including the practical realities of his situation. The atmosphere in the room grew tense. Elena glanced at David Chen, worried about how this conversation might affect him. The elderly man was still focused on Max, seemingly oblivious to the power struggle happening at the foot of his bed. But how much did he understand? "Perhaps we should continue this discussion outside," Elena suggested, her protective instincts rising both for the patient and for Max, who had begun to sense the tension, his ears flicking nervously. James nodded curtly. "Excellent suggestion, Doctor. Uncle David needs his rest." The three of them stepped into the hallway, leaving Max beside the bed. Through the partially open door, Elena could see the dog settling in closer to his owner, as if determined not to be separated again. "Mr. Chen," Dr. Reed began once they were outside, "I understand your concerns about facility policies, but in my professional opinion, continued interaction with his dog is vital to your uncle's recovery. We could arrange supervised visits, perhaps." "That's actually what I wanted to discuss," James interrupted. "I've been considering what would be best for Uncle David long-term. This facility is excellent but expensive, and his Medicare only covers a portion of the costs. I'm looking into transferring him to a skilled nursing facility in Portland, closer to where I live, which would make it easier for me to oversee his care." Elena felt her heart sink. Portland was over 3 hours away by car. "When would this transfer happen?" "Within the week, ideally. I've already initiated discussions with a facility there that has an excellent reputation for stroke rehabilitation." Dr. Reed frowned. "Moving him so soon after we've seen this breakthrough could be detrimental to his progress. The stress of relocation alone." "The Portland facility has agreed to review his case immediately," James cut in smoothly. "I've emailed them his medical records this morning." Elena struggled to keep her expression neutral. Something about this situation felt wrong. James Chen had been absent during his uncle's entire medical crisis, yet now he was swooping in with ready-made plans that seemed more convenient for himself than beneficial for his uncle. "What about Max?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind. "Will the Portland facility allow him to visit?" James hesitated, adjusting his already perfect tie. "That's actually the other matter I wanted to address. Given Uncle David's condition and the uncertainty of his recovery, I don't think it's practical for him to keep the dog. I've been in touch with a local shelter that has agreed to take Max and find him a suitable home." "A shelter?" Elena couldn't keep the shock from her voice. "Mr. Chen, Max has shown extraordinary loyalty to your uncle. He waited at the hospital every day for 2 months. You can't just—" "I understand this may seem harsh," James interrupted, his tone cooling noticeably, "but I have to be practical. Uncle David may never recover enough to care for a dog again. His apartment has already been cleared out. I live in a condo with a strict no-pets policy. What would you suggest?" Before Elena could respond, Nurse Patel appeared around the corner, her usual calm demeanor replaced by urgency. "Dr. Reed, Mr. Chen's vitals are elevating. I think he's becoming agitated." They rushed back into the room to find David Chen attempting to speak, his face flushed with effort and distress. Max stood alert beside the bed, whining softly with concern. "Don't," the elderly man managed to say, his eyes fixed on his nephew. "Don't take." James paled slightly. "Uncle David, you need to calm down. We're just discussing options for your care." "He heard us," Elena realized. The door was partially open. Dr. Reed moved quickly to check the monitors. "Mr. Chen, please try to relax. This level of stress isn't good for your recovery." But David Chen was determined to communicate, his eyes burning with an intensity that belied his weakened state. Max stays," he insisted, each word a victory over his damaged brain. Not Portland." James looked genuinely taken aback. "Uncle David, you don't understand the complications involved. Your condition requires specialized care." "I understand," the elderly man countered, his good hand gripping Max's fur as if anchoring himself. "My choice." Dr. Reed and Elena exchanged glances. This level of coherent communication represented a significant breakthrough, however labored the speech. Max sensed his owner's distress and gently licked his hand, a gesture that visibly calmed the elderly man. "Perhaps," Dr. Reed suggested carefully, "we should respect Mr. Chen's wishes while exploring all available options. It's clear he comprehends more than we might have assumed." James appeared conflicted, his confident demeanor cracking slightly. "I'm only trying to do what's best for him." "Are you?" The question escaped Elena before she could stop herself. All eyes turned to her, and she forced herself to continue. "Mr. Chen, forgive my bluntness, but your uncle's apartment superintendent mentioned he hadn't had visitors in the 5 years he'd lived there. Now you're making major decisions about his care after being unreachable for 3 months. It raises questions about your familiarity with his wishes." A flush spread across James's face. "My relationship with my uncle is none of your concern, Dr. Vasquez. You're not even his physician of record." "No, but I am," Dr. Reed interjected firmly. "And I have to consider what's medically best for my patient. Right now, that includes maintaining the connection with his dog, which has demonstrably improved his condition." From the bed, David Chen made another attempt to speak. "Elena," he said, surprising everyone with his use of her name, which he must have overheard. "Help. Max." The simple plea struck Elena like a physical blow. The trust in those 2 words, from a man who barely knew her, carried a weight of responsibility she felt in her very core. "I will," she promised without hesitation. "I'll make sure he's taken care of." James Chen straightened his shoulders, clearly attempting to regain control of the situation. "This is becoming unnecessarily complicated. As Uncle David's legal power of attorney—" "Actually," Nurse Patel interrupted, stepping forward with a tablet in hand, "I've just reviewed Mr. Chen's admission paperwork. His power of attorney designation is conditional, only activating if he's deemed mentally incompetent. Given his current level of responsiveness and decision-making capacity, Dr. Reed would need to perform a competency evaluation before any major care decisions are made." James's expression darkened. "That's a technicality." "It's hospital protocol," Nurse Patel countered calmly. "Patient autonomy is taken very seriously here." Dr. Reed nodded, turning to David Chen. "Mr. Chen, would you like me to perform a competency evaluation to determine if you're able to make your own healthcare decisions?" "Yes," David responded, the word clear and firm despite his physical limitations. James looked from his uncle to the medical staff, clearly calculating his next move. Finally, he checked his watch with exaggerated care. "I have a business meeting I can't reschedule. We'll continue this discussion tomorrow, after I've consulted with my attorney." He moved to the bedside, his expression softening slightly. "Uncle David, please understand I only want what's best for you." The elderly man's gaze remained steady, unconvinced. After James left, the room seemed to exhale collectively. Max returned to his position by the bed, leaning his head against David's hand as if to reassure him. "Thank you," David said to the room at large, his speech noticeably clearer with the reduction in stress. "For helping." Dr. Reed patted his shoulder gently. "We'll work this out, Mr. Chen. In the meantime, I'll arrange for that competency evaluation as soon as possible." When the doctor and nurse had left, Elena pulled a chair close to the bedside. "Mr. Chen, I hope you don't mind that I took Max home with me last night. He's been staying at my apartment." David Chen smiled, the expression lopsided due to his stroke but unmistakably warm. "Good dog," he said, stroking Max's fur. "Best friend." Elena nodded. swallowing against the tightness in her throat. He never gave up on you." The elderly man's eyes filled with tears. "Loyal," he managed. Then, after a visible struggle to find the words, "Not like family." The simple statement held volumes of hurt and disappointment. Elena wondered about the history between David and his nephew. What had created such a distance that James could so easily dismiss the deep bond between his uncle and Max? "I'll help you keep him," Elena promised, uncertain exactly how she would fulfill that pledge, but determined nonetheless. "We'll figure something out." The following morning, Elena sat in Dr. Reed's office, hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee, as they discussed David Chen's situation. Max lay at her feet, seemingly content, but occasionally glancing toward the door, as if eager to resume his vigil at his owner's bedside. "The competency evaluation results are encouraging," Dr. Reed explained, pushing a folder across his desk. "Mr. Chen demonstrates sufficient cognitive function to make his own medical decisions. His speech is still impaired and he struggles with complex language, but his comprehension and reasoning abilities remain largely intact." Elena felt a surge of relief. So James can't force him to move to Portland? Not without a legal battle, which I suspect he might pursue. Dr. Reed removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose wearily. "James Chen strikes me as someone accustomed to getting his way." "There's something off about his sudden interest in his uncle's care," Elena said, voicing the concern that had been nagging at her since yesterday. "The apartment superintendent told me Mr. Chen had no visitors. If they were so estranged, why is James so invested now?" Dr. Reed replaced his glasses, his expression thoughtful. "Financial considerations, perhaps? David Chen must have some assets if James is his only living relative. But enough to justify this level of involvement? Relocating him to Portland seems excessive if it's just about managing a modest inheritance." Before Dr. Reed could respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Nurse Patel entered, her normally serene expression troubled. "James Chen is back," she announced, "and he's brought a lawyer." Elena and Dr. Reed exchanged concerned glances before following Nurse Patel to David Chen's room. Max trotted beside them, his canine intuition seeming to sense the tension in the air. In room 115, they found James standing with a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit. David Chen was propped up in his bed, his expression a mixture of confusion and defiance. "Dr. Reed," James greeted them with forced politeness. "This is Ms. Harrington, my attorney. We've been discussing Uncle David's situation and the necessary legal steps to ensure his proper care." The lawyer stepped forward, extending a business card to Dr. Reed. "I understand there's some confusion regarding Mr. Chen's capacity to make his own healthcare decisions. I've prepared paperwork for a formal guardianship petition." Dr. Reed accepted the card but maintained a neutral expression. "Actually, Ms. Harrington, I completed a competency evaluation this morning. Mr. Chen demonstrates sufficient cognitive function to maintain his decision-making autonomy." James's face tightened. "With all due respect, Doctor, a single evaluation immediately following an emotional reunion doesn't provide an accurate picture of my uncle's mental state. Ms. Harrington has advised me that a more comprehensive assessment by an independent neurologist would be appropriate." "You're within your rights to request that," Dr. Reed acknowledged. "However, until such an assessment contradicts my findings, Mr. Chen retains the legal authority to make his own healthcare decisions." David Chen had been watching this exchange with increasing agitation. "No, Portland," he stated firmly, his good hand clenching the bedsheet. "Stay here." Ms. Harrington turned to him with a practiced smile that held no warmth. "Mr. Chen, your nephew is only concerned about providing you with the best possible care. The facility in Portland offers specialized stroke rehabilitation programs that could significantly improve your recovery prospects. And what about Max? Elena asked, unable to remain silent any longer. Does this specialized facility allow therapy animals? The lawyer glanced dismissively at the dog. That's a separate issue. Mr. Chen's health needs must take priority over pet ownership considerations. Not separate, David insisted, his voice stronger than Elena had yet heard it. Max helps me. James sighed with theatrical patience. Uncle David, I understand you're attached to the dog, but your recovery has to come first. The Portland facility has agreed to expedite your admission, but they're firm about their no pets policy. Elena noticed something in David's expression change, a subtle shift from defiance to calculation. He gestured weakly toward the small table beside his bed where a notepad and pen lay. Write, he requested, his eyes meeting Elena's. Help me write. Understanding his intent, Elena moved to the bedside and positioned the notepad where David could see it clearly. She handed him the pen, which he gripped awkwardly in his right hand, his left side still largely paralyzed from the stroke. With painstaking effort, David began to write. His handwriting was shaky but legible, the simple act requiring intense concentration. Everyone in the room watched in silence as he laboriously formed each letter. After several minutes, he completed a single sentence and pushed the notepad toward Elena. She read aloud, I appoint Dr. Elena Vasquez as my medical advocate. James stepped forward, his composure slipping. That's not legally binding. She's not even your primary physician. Ms. Harrington placed a restraining hand on her client's arm. Actually, Mr. Chen, a handwritten directive like this does carry legal weight, especially when witnessed by medical professionals. However, she added, turning to Elena, it creates a potential conflict of interest, given Dr. Vasquez's current care of the dog in question. I'm not seeking to control Mr. Chen's assets or make decisions contrary to his wishes, Elena responded evenly. I'm simply willing to help ensure his preferences are respected. David nodded emphatically, then laboriously wrote another line. Max stays with me. Dr. Reed cleared his throat. Perhaps we can find a middle ground. The facility director has agreed to discuss potential accommodations for Max's visits, given the clear therapeutic benefit. What if we established a regular visitation schedule while continuing to work on a more permanent solution? James and his lawyer exchanged glances. That might be acceptable, Ms. Harrington allowed, as a temporary arrangement. However, we still believe the Portland facility would better serve Mr. Chen's long-term recovery needs. David shook his head firmly, pointing to what he had written. I think we need to respect Mr. Chen's wishes, Nurse Patel interjected gently. He's made them quite clear. James's professional facade finally cracked. This is ridiculous. A week ago he couldn't even speak, and now we're treating his scribbles as legally binding directives, and all because of some dog. As if in response to being mentioned, Max moved closer to David's bed, positioning himself protectively between the elderly man and his agitated nephew. There was no aggression in the dog's posture, merely a quiet, dignified assertion of his place at his owner's side. The simple action seemed to diffuse some of the tension in the room. David reached out to place his hand on Max's head, the connection between them palpable to everyone present. Ms. Harrington observed this interaction with a slight softening of her professional demeanor. Mr. Chen, she addressed James, perhaps we should take some time to reconsider our approach. Courts generally favor respecting the expressed wishes of patients when they demonstrate clear preferences. James looked as though he wanted to argue further, but restrained himself with visible effort. Fine. We'll delay the Portland transfer temporarily, but I want regular neurological assessments of his condition and decision-making capacity. That's reasonable, Dr. Reed agreed. And in the meantime, we'll work with the facility administration on formalizing Max's visitation rights. After James and his lawyer left, promising to return the following day with additional paperwork, the room seemed to collectively exhale. David Chen looked exhausted by the confrontation, but satisfied with the outcome, his hand still resting on Max's fur. "Thank you," he said to Elena, the simple words carrying profound gratitude. "I don't understand why he's pushing so hard for the transfer," Elena said, pulling a chair closer to the bed. "There must be something we're missing." David's expression turned thoughtful. With renewed determination, he reached for the notepad again. This time his writing was even slower, but the message was clear. House, money, trust. "You have a house?" Elena asked, pieces beginning to fall into place. "And a trust?" David nodded, then wrote with painstaking effort, "James executor if I'm incapacitated." Dr. Reed and Nurse Patel exchanged meaningful glances. "That would explain his urgency to establish your lack of competency," Dr. Reed observed. "If you're declared unable to manage your affairs, he gains control of your assets. And if you're moved far away from your support system here, with no one advocating for you except James." Elena didn't need to finish the thought. David's face reflected a mixture of sadness and resignation. He added one more word to the notepad. "Family." The single word contained volumes: disappointment, betrayal, the pain of realizing that blood ties didn't guarantee loyalty or love. In contrast, Max pressed closer to David's side, his unwavering devotion a stark counterpoint to James's calculated concern. "We won't let him isolate you," Elena promised, a protective determination rising within her. "Max found a way to bring us together, and now we're going to make sure both of you stay exactly where you belong, together." The next few days established a new routine. Elena adjusted her work schedule to accommodate daily visits to Sunset Gardens with Max, spending her mornings at the facility before heading to the hospital for her evening shifts. Dr. Reed had successfully negotiated with the administration for Max to be classified as a therapeutic visitor, complete with an official badge that hung from his collar alongside a newly purchased proper service dog vest. Though not technically a trained service animal, Max's extraordinary bond with David and clear positive impact on his recovery had convinced even the most skeptical administrators. Elena had also contacted the hospital's legal department, who recommended a local elder law attorney named Sarah Goodwin. Ms. Goodwin agreed to meet with David Chen at Sunset Gardens to discuss protecting his autonomy and assets from his nephew's maneuvering. "You're sure about this?" Elena asked David as they waited for the attorney's arrival. Max lay contentedly beside the bed, his presence now so integrated into the room that the staff had begun leaving water and treats for him. David nodded firmly. His speech had improved remarkably over the past few days, though he still struggled with longer sentences. "Need protection for both of us." "James hasn't returned since that day with his lawyer," Elena observed. "That makes me nervous." "Planning," David said simply. "James always planning." The door opened, and Nurse Patel ushered in a middle-aged woman with a practical haircut and keen eyes behind stylish glasses. She carried a leather briefcase and moved with brisk efficiency that somehow remained warm and approachable. "Mr. Chen, I'm Sarah Goodwin," she introduced herself, setting her briefcase on the bedside table. "Dr. Vasquez has briefed me on your situation. I understand you're concerned about your nephew's intentions regarding your estate." David nodded, his expression serious. "Want to protect my choices. And Max." Sarah smiled, glancing at the dog who had raised his head at the sound of his name. "I can see why. He's quite special." She turned back to David. "I've reviewed the power of attorney document your nephew was attempting to enforce. There are several avenues we can pursue to ensure your wishes are respected." For the next hour, Sarah explained various legal options while David listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions that demonstrated his understanding despite his speech limitations. Elena was impressed by both David's mental acuity and Sarah's patience in accommodating his communication style. The simplest approach, Sarah concluded, would be to create a new advance healthcare directive and revise your power of attorney to name someone you trust implicitly. This would supersede the conditional power you granted to your nephew. David pointed at Elena without hesitation. Trust her. Elena felt a wave of emotion at his simple declaration of faith in her. Mr. Chen, I'm honored, but are you sure? We've only known each other a short time. You brought Max back to me, he said simply. Showed true character. Sarah observed this exchange with a thoughtful expression. It's not unusual for significant life events to reveal who truly has our best interests at heart. However, she added practically, we should consider naming a second agent as backup, perhaps Dr. Reed or Nurse Patel. By the end of the meeting, they had drafted new documents naming Elena as David's healthcare proxy and medical power of attorney, with Dr. Reed as the backup. David also initiated changes to his financial arrangements, removing James as the executor of his trust and replacing him with Sarah's law firm. He won't be happy, David commented as Sarah packed up her papers. Probably not, Sarah agreed. But these documents clearly demonstrate your mental competency and explicit wishes. They'll be difficult to challenge legally, especially with Dr. Reed's formal assessment supporting your decision-making capacity. After Sarah left, promising to return the next day with the finalized documents for signing, David appeared tired but relieved. Thank you, he said to Elena, who had remained throughout the meeting, for everything. I'm just glad I could help, she replied, adjusting his pillows. Now you should rest. Max and I will come back this evening. Not necessary, David protested weakly. You work tonight. I switched shifts with a colleague, Elena explained. I'll be working days for a while. Besides, she added with a smile, Max gets anxious if he doesn't see you twice a day. The dog's ears perked up at his name, and David chuckled. A rough sound, but one that brought warmth to Elena's heart. It was the first time she had heard him laugh. As they were preparing to leave, Dr. Reed entered with Nurse Patel, both looking concerned. Elena, could we speak with you for a moment? Dr. Reed asked, his tone setting off immediate alarm bells. In the hallway, Dr. Reed got straight to the point. James Chen was here earlier, meeting with the facility director. We weren't informed until afterward. What did he want? Elena asked, anxiety tightening her chest. He's challenging Max's presence on health and safety grounds, Nurse Patel explained, claiming allergies and sanitation concerns. That's absurd, Elena protested. Max is cleaner than most humans who visit, and no one in this wing has reported allergies. We know, Dr. Reed said grimly, but James has influential connections. The director is under pressure to enforce the facility's standard no pets policy. He's agreed to a 1-week grace period while we petition for an official exception, but after that, the implication hung in the air. If they couldn't secure formal approval, Max would be banned from visiting. We can't let that happen, Elena said firmly. You've seen how crucial Max is to Mr. Chen's recovery. His speech, his motivation, his emotional well-being, all dramatically improved because of that dog. We're documenting everything, Nurse Patel assured her, creating a case file with daily progress notes that directly correlate to Max's visits. Dr. Reed has also requested evaluations from the speech and physical therapist to support our petition. There's something else, Dr. Reed added. James has requested Mr. Chen's complete medical records, including all recent neurological assessments. Elena frowned. He's looking for ammunition to challenge the new legal documents. Most likely, Dr. Reed agreed. We're processing the request as slowly as regulations allow, but eventually, we'll have to provide them. At least the new advance directive will be signed and notarized by tomorrow, Elena said. That should provide some protection. That evening, Elena returned with Max as promised, but said nothing to David about James's latest maneuvers. He seemed in good spirits, proudly demonstrating his improved grip strength by holding a cup without assistance. Max watched these exercises with apparent fascination, his tail thumping appreciatively whenever David successfully completed a task. Physical therapist says good progress, David reported. Faster than expected. That's wonderful, Elena responded, genuinely pleased. Dr. Reed mentioned you might be able to start using a walker soon, at least for short distances. David nodded enthusiastically. Want to take Max outside, see garden. The simple goal, walking in the garden with his dog, spoke volumes about what motivated David's recovery. Not abstract medical milestones, but the desire to reclaim ordinary moments of joy. As if understanding he was being discussed, Max moved closer to the bed, resting his chin on the mattress near David's hand. The elderly man immediately began stroking the dog's soft fur, the repetitive motion visibly calming for both of them. Elena watched this interaction, marveling at the depth of their connection. In her years of medical practice, she had witnessed many healing relationships, but there was something uniquely powerful about the bond between this man and his dog. A wordless understanding that transcended the limitations of speech and physical ability. "We won't let anyone separate you," she promised silently, a fierce protective instinct rising within her. James Chen might have legal expertise and influential connections on his side, but Elena had something more powerful, the truth of what was best for David's recovery and well-being. Later that night, as Elena and Max returned to her apartment, she found herself mentally cataloging the space with new eyes. The spare bedroom that had served as little more than storage could be converted into a proper room. The building had a small communal garden that would be perfect for someone with limited mobility. The elevator, though occasionally temperamental, could accommodate a wheelchair if necessary. "Am I really considering this?" she asked Max as they entered the apartment. The dog looked up at her with those soulful brown eyes, his expression seeming to say that he already knew the answer. Elena sank onto the couch, suddenly overwhelmed by the implications of the path she was contemplating. In less than a week, her carefully ordered life had expanded to include not just a dog, but potentially an elderly stroke patient she barely knew. The rational part of her brain argued that she was being impulsive, overstepping professional boundaries, taking on responsibilities that weren't hers to shoulder. And yet, as Max settled beside her on the couch, his warm presence inexplicably comforting, Elena recognized that something fundamental had shifted in her world. The walls she had built around her heart since her divorce were crumbling, allowing her to feel connections she had denied herself for too long. The next morning, Elena woke with a clarity of purpose that surprised her. Her decision to help David and Max stay together hadn't been a momentary impulse, but rather the culmination of changes that had been shifting inside her since the moment she first approached that caramel-colored dog waiting patiently at the hospital entrance. Over breakfast, she called her landlord to discuss the possibility of having an elderly tenant move in temporarily for medical reasons. To her relief, Mr. Greenberg was supportive, mentioning that his own mother had lived with him after a stroke. "The building's not perfectly accessible," he warned, "but we could install some grab bars and a ramp at the back entrance if needed." Encouraged by this conversation, Elena made several more calls, to a local home healthcare agency, to an occupational therapist who specialized in home modifications, and finally to Sarah Goodwin, who expressed cautious approval of the contingency plan. It would certainly strengthen our position if we could demonstrate a concrete alternative to James's Portland facility, the lawyer acknowledged. But are you sure about this, Dr. Vasquez? Taking in an elderly stroke patient is no small commitment. I'm not proposing anything permanent, Elena clarified, though even as she said it, she wondered if that was entirely true. Just a transitional arrangement until Mr. Chen regains enough function to consider more independent living options. And if that doesn't happen, Sarah pressed gently. Stroke recovery can be unpredictable, as you know better than most. Elena glanced at Max, who was watching her with those perceptive brown eyes. Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. For now, I just want to create an option that keeps him with Max and away from James's control. At Sunset Gardens, they found David working with a speech therapist, his determination evident in the beads of sweat on his forehead as he struggled through pronunciation exercises. Max immediately settled beside the bed in what had become his customary spot, his presence seeming to energize David, who managed a wobbly smile despite his obvious fatigue. He's making remarkable progress, the therapist told Elena as she was leaving. His comprehension is nearly normal and his speech production improves daily. Whatever you're doing with this therapy dog program, it's working wonders. Elena waited until the therapist had left before sharing her morning's activities with David. It's just a backup plan, she emphasized, not wanting to overwhelm him. In case James creates problems with your continued stay here. David listened attentively, his eyes brightening with each detail. When she finished, he reached for her hand, gripping it with surprising strength. You would do this for us? Of course, Elena replied, surprised by how easy the answer came. You and Max deserve to stay together. Anyone can see how much you help each other. David's eyes grew misty. No one has shown such kindness. Not since. He gestured toward Max, unable to find the words but making his meaning clear. Before Elena could respond, Sarah Goodwin arrived with the finalized legal documents accompanied by a notary public. The signing process took nearly an hour, with David carefully reading each page despite his fatigue. When he finally placed his shaky signature on the last document, the relief on his face was palpable. These will be filed immediately, Sarah assured them. I've also prepared a letter for the facility administration detailing Mr. Chen's legal rights regarding his healthcare decisions and choice of visitors, including Max. As if on cue, the door opened, and Dr. Reed entered with the facility director, a silver-haired man named Martin Collins, whom Elena had met briefly during the negotiations for Max's visits. His expression was grave as he greeted them. Dr. Vasquez, Mr. Chen, I'm afraid we have a situation developing that requires immediate attention. He nodded at the legal documents spread across the bedside table. I see you're already taking precautions, which is wise. What's happened? Elena asked, her stomach tightening with apprehension. Dr. Reed stepped forward. James Chen has escalated his efforts. He's filed a formal complaint with the state licensing board, alleging that Sunset Gardens is violating health regulations by allowing an uncertified animal on the premises. He's also submitted a petition to the probate court questioning Mr. Chen's mental capacity. David's face darkened, his jaw setting stubbornly despite the slight droop on his affected side. Not surprised, James always fights dirty. Martin Collins sighed heavily. The state inspectors will be here tomorrow. While I personally believe in the therapeutic value of your dog's visits, Mr. Chen, I'm bound by regulations. If the inspectors determine that Max's presence violates our licensing requirements, I'll have no choice but to enforce the restriction. But that's precisely what James wants, Elena protested. He's manipulating the system to isolate Mr. Chen and push through the Portland transfer. I understand your concern, Collins replied sympathetically. But my first responsibility is to the facility's compliance with state regulations. Sarah Goodwin, who had been listening intently, spoke up. Mr. Collins, I've just filed power of attorney and healthcare directive documents naming Dr. Vasquez as Mr. Chen's medical decision maker. Any transfer to Portland would require her approval, which I understand will not be forthcoming. Collins looked relieved at this information. That certainly simplifies my position regarding the transfer request. However, the animal visitation issue remains problematic from a regulatory perspective. What if, Dr. Reed suggested, we formally registered Max as a therapy dog? There are expedited programs for animals that already demonstrate the appropriate temperament and behavior. That would help, Collins acknowledged, but the certification process typically takes weeks, and we need to address the inspection tomorrow. Actually, Elena interjected, I may have a solution. She explained her contingency plan for bringing David to her apartment. It would only be temporary, until we can resolve the certification issues. The building owner has already approved the arrangement, and I've contacted healthcare providers who can continue Mr. Chen's therapy regimen. David nodded emphatically. I want this. My choice. Collins and Dr. Reed exchanged concerned glances. Medically speaking, Dr. Reed said carefully, Mr. Chen is stable enough for such a transition, provided proper home health care is arranged. But it's an unusual step, particularly for a patient still in active rehabilitation. Sometimes unusual circumstances call for unusual solutions, Sarah observed. And legally, Mr. Chen has every right to choose his living arrangement, now that we've established his decision-making capacity. After further discussion of logistics and medical considerations, Collins reluctantly agreed to prepare the necessary discharge paperwork. I should warn you, he added, that James Chen is unlikely to accept this development quietly. Let him come, David said with unexpected force, his hand finding Max's fur as if drawing strength from the contact. I'm ready now. Have protection. As the others left to arrange the details, Elena found herself alone with David and Max. The enormity of what they were undertaking suddenly hit her. Was she being reckless, allowing her emotional attachment to this unusual situation to override professional caution? As if sensing her doubts, David spoke again, his words slow but deliberate. You changed everything, for both of us. He gestured toward Max, who had settled with his head on David's lap. Before, I was just waiting. Now, fighting to live. Max looked up at Elena, his expressive eyes seeming to convey a similar sentiment. This unlikely pair had given her something too, a purpose beyond the clinical efficiency that had defined her life since the divorce, a reason to open her home and heart again. We'll make this work, she promised, as much to herself as to them. Somehow, we'll find a way to stay together. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of preparations. Elena took Max home briefly to reorganize her apartment, creating a comfortable space in the spare bedroom with a hospital bed rented from a medical supply company. She stocked her refrigerator with easy-to-eat foods, installed grab bars in the bathroom, and moved furniture to create clear pathways for a wheelchair. Throughout these preparations, Max followed her attentively, occasionally carrying small items between rooms as if consciously helping with the arrangements. His intuitive understanding of what was happening reinforced Elena's conviction that they were making the right choice, however unconventional it might appear to others. By evening, everything was ready. Elena returned to Sunset Gardens with a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. Tomorrow would bring challenges: the state inspection, James's inevitable opposition, the complex logistics of moving a stroke patient to a private residence. But as she watched Max reunite with David, their mutual joy palpable even in the sterile hospital environment, She knew with absolute certainty that protecting their bond was worth any difficulty they might face. The morning of David's discharge arrived with an unseasonable rainstorm that seemed fitting for the tense atmosphere at Sunset Gardens. Elena had barely slept, her mind racing with last-minute details and contingency plans. Max, sensing her anxiety, had stayed unusually close throughout the night, occasionally nudging her hand with his nose as if offering reassurance. They arrived at the facility early, hoping to complete the discharge process before the state inspectors, or James, could appear. Dr. Reed met them at the entrance, his expression taut with concern. "James is already here," he informed them in a low voice. "He arrived with his lawyer about 20 minutes ago. They're meeting with Martin Collins now." Elena's heart sank. "Does he know about the discharge plan?" "I don't think so, not yet, but we should move quickly." In David's room, they found him already dressed in comfortable clothes that Elena had brought the previous day, sitting in a wheelchair with a determined expression. His few personal possessions had been packed into a small duffel bag. "Ready," he stated simply when they entered, his eyes lighting up at the sight of Max, who immediately went to his side. Nurse Patel appeared with a stack of paperwork. "We need to complete these discharge forms before you can leave. Mr. Collins is occupied at the moment, but he's already signed the necessary authorizations." As they worked through the forms, David signing with painstaking effort where required, Elena kept glancing anxiously toward the door, expecting James to burst in at any moment. Max seemed equally vigilant, his ears perking up at every footstep in the hallway. They were reviewing the medication schedule when the door finally opened. Elena tensed, but it was Sarah Goodwin who entered, looking remarkably composed despite the situation. "I've just come from the administration office," she reported. "James is attempting to get an emergency injunction to prevent the discharge, but he's hampered by our new legal documents. I've provided copies to Martin Collins and reminded him of the facility's potential liability if they interfere with a competent patient's expressed wishes." "How did James react?" Elena asked. "Not well," Sarah replied with professional understatement. "He's threatening lawsuits against the facility, Dr. Reed, and you personally, Dr. Vasquez. Lots of bluster about undue influence and professional misconduct." David's face darkened with anger. "Always, using money and threats. Whole life, same pattern." "The good news," Sarah continued, "is that our documents are in order, and Mr. Chen's competency has been well established. James can file all the petitions he wants, but he can't override your legal right to leave this facility of your own volition, Mr. Chen." As if to underscore this point, Dr. Reed arrived with the final discharge papers. "The medical transport service is waiting outside. We should go now before—" The door burst open and James Chen stormed in, his face flushed with anger. His lawyer followed close behind, looking considerably less confident than during their previous encounter. "What is this?" James demanded, gesturing at the wheelchair and packed bag. "You can't seriously be discharging him to go home with her." He pointed accusingly at Elena. "This is outrageous. Uncle David can barely speak, let alone care for himself." "James," David said, his voice stronger and clearer than Elena had yet heard it, "this is my choice, my life." "You're not thinking clearly," James insisted, his tone softening to one of exaggerated concern. "You've been manipulated by these people who don't understand your condition. The Portland facility has specialists who can help you recover fully." "Mr. Chen," Sarah Goodwin interjected calmly, "your uncle has executed legal documents naming Dr. Vasquez as his healthcare proxy. His medical team has approved this discharge plan, which includes appropriate home healthcare services. Your concerns have been noted, but they don't override your uncle's expressed wishes." James turned to his lawyer in frustration. "Aren't you going to say something?" "This is exactly what we were trying to prevent." The lawyer cleared her throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Chen, I advised you earlier that the new power of attorney and healthcare directives significantly complicate our position. Without clear evidence of coercion or incompetence, this is absurd, James exclaimed. Look at him, he can barely form a sentence. Speech impairment, not same as mental impairment, David stated deliberately, each word carefully formed. I understand everything. Choose to go with Elena and Max. Max, who had been watching the confrontation warily from David's side, pressed closer to the wheelchair as if emphasizing his role in this decision. James's expression hardened as he looked at the dog. This is all because of that animal, isn't it? You're making irrational decisions just to keep a pet that you'll never be able to care for properly again. Max is family, David replied simply. Unlike some people. The words hung in the air, their impact visible in James's flinch and sudden pallor. For a moment, Elena glimpsed something beyond anger in his expression, perhaps hurt, or even shame, before his face settled back into cold hostility. This isn't over, he warned, straightening his already immaculate tie. When this ill-conceived arrangement inevitably fails, don't expect me to pick up the pieces. He turned to his lawyer. We're leaving. Prepare the court filings we discussed. After they departed, the room seemed to exhale collectively. David looked exhausted by the confrontation, but resolute. Let's go. Home, he said quietly. The word home caught Elena by surprise, reminding her of the magnitude of the change they were undertaking. Her apartment, once a sterile refuge where she merely existed between hospital shifts, was about to become home to this unlikely family unit they had formed. The medical transport service handled the journey with professional efficiency. Max rode in Elena's car, which followed the transport van closely through the rainy streets. By early afternoon, they had David settled in the hospital bed in Elena's spare room, with Max curled contentedly at his feet. Comfortable? Elena asked, adjusting the pillows behind David's back. He nodded, looking around the room with interest. Nice place. Thank you for sharing. It's nothing special, Elena demurred, suddenly self-conscious about the room's sparse decor. I never really got around to making it feel like home after the divorce. We'll help, David assured her, gesturing to include Max in this promise. Together. The home health nurse arrived shortly after, a cheerful woman named Brenda who quickly established a good rapport with David and seemed unfazed by Max's attentive presence. She reviewed the medication schedule with Elena, demonstrated some basic care techniques, and helped David through a short physical therapy session. You've got a good setup here, she commented as she prepared to leave, and having his dog around clearly motivates him. I've seen patients make remarkable progress when they have something meaningful to work toward. By evening, they had settled into a tentative routine. Elena prepared a simple dinner that accommodated David's swallowing difficulties. Soft foods cut into small pieces, served on the overbed table. Max ate from his bowl nearby, maintaining his protective vigil. As Elena cleared the dishes, her phone rang. It was Dr. Reed. The state inspectors came this afternoon, he reported without preamble. As expected, they raised concerns about Max's presence, but since you'd already discharged Mr. Chen, it became a moot point. However, he continued, his tone growing more serious, James filed a complaint with the medical board, alleging that you violated professional boundaries and exploited a vulnerable patient. Elena's stomach dropped. Can he really do that? He can file the complaint, yes. Whether it has merit is another question entirely. Sarah Goodwin is already preparing a response, and I've submitted a statement supporting your actions as being in Mr. Chen's best medical interest. After ending the call, Elena returned to the bedroom, trying to hide her worry. But David, despite his impairments, remained remarkably perceptive. Bad news? He asked, patting the edge of the bed in invitation for her to sit. Elena hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. James has filed a complaint against me with the medical board. It probably won't amount to anything, but it's unsettling. David's face clouded with concern. My fault, bringing trouble to you. No, Elena said firmly. This was my choice and I don't regret it. Max, sensing the tension, moved from his spot at David's feet to press against Elena's side, offering his silent support. The simple gesture brought unexpected tears to her eyes. See, David said softly. Max knows good people, always has. He reached for Elena's hand with his less affected right arm. We'll face, together, whatever comes. In that moment, with David's warm hand clasping hers and Max's steady presence beside her, Elena felt a certainty that transcended the legal complications and professional risks. This unlikely family they had formed was worth fighting for, worth any challenge James might throw their way. Outside, the rain had finally stopped, and the setting sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden light through the window. It felt, to Elena, like a promise that after the storm, clarity would come, and with it, the strength to face whatever lay ahead. 3 months passed with a rhythm that came to feel natural, as if Elena, David, and Max had always been a unit, rather than strangers brought together by extraordinary circumstances. Spring yielded to summer, filling Elena's small balcony with potted plants that David tended with increasing dexterity as his right side mobility improved. Max divided his time between guarding David during therapy sessions and accompanying Elena on morning runs, a new routine she had established to manage the stress of James's ongoing legal maneuvers. The complaint to the medical board had been dismissed after review, with the board concluding that Elena's actions fell within ethical boundaries given the unique circumstances. Sarah Goodwin had successfully defended against James's petition to the probate court, presenting compelling evidence of David's competency and the positive impact of his current living arrangement on his recovery. But James remained persistent, filing appeals and seeking additional neurological evaluations, each action requiring more of their time and emotional energy to counter. His determination seemed fueled by something beyond simple financial interest, a bitterness that Elena couldn't fully understand. He was always angry, David explained one evening as they sat on the balcony, watching the sunset. His speech had improved dramatically, though he still occasionally searched for words. My brother, his father, was the same. Nothing. Ever enough. Max lay at David's feet, his head resting on the elderly man's slippers. The dog had developed an uncanny ability to anticipate when David might need support, positioning himself to provide balance during walking exercises or fetching dropped items before they were even requested. What will make him stop? Elena wondered aloud, watching a hummingbird dart among the flowers David had planted. We've won every legal challenge, yet he keeps coming. David was quiet for a moment, absently stroking Max's fur. Need to talk to him, face to face, without lawyers. Elena looked at him in surprise. Are you sure that's wise? The last time you saw him? Different now, David interrupted gently. I'm stronger, can speak for myself. And it was true. The frail, barely responsive man she had first encountered at Sunset Gardens had transformed over these months. While still dealing with significant left-side weakness and occasional speech hesitations, David had reclaimed his independence in ways that impressed even his most optimistic therapists. He prepared simple meals, navigated the apartment with a cane rather than a wheelchair, and had recently started joining Elena and Max for short walks in the neighborhood. If that's what you want, Elena agreed. But I think we should have Sarah present, just in case. The meeting was arranged for the following week. James initially refused, but Sarah employed some legal leverage involving the trust administration that finally secured his cooperation. They chose neutral ground, a private room at the library where David had begun volunteering, reading to children with his newly recovered speech abilities. James arrived precisely on time, his immaculate appearance at odds with the obvious tension in his posture. He barely acknowledged Elena and Sarah, his gaze fixed warily on his uncle, who sat calmly with Max beside his chair. "You're looking well," James said stiffly after an awkward silence. The Portland facility could have achieved similar results. "Perhaps," David acknowledged, "but without Max, without friends." He gestured toward Elena. James's jaw tightened. "This isn't about the dog. It's about proper care and financial responsibility. Your assets—" "My assets," David interrupted with gentle firmness, "are mine to manage. The trust is secure. Your portion, still guaranteed." Elena glanced at Sarah in surprise. This was something David hadn't mentioned to her, that James was a beneficiary of his trust. James seemed equally startled by this direct acknowledgement. "I'm not concerned about 50,000, David continued calmly. "Set aside for you, always was. No need for all this fighting." James sank into a chair, his carefully maintained facade cracking. "This isn't about money. Not really." He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, disheveling it. "You cut us off. After Dad left, you just disappeared. For years. Then suddenly I'm your emergency contact and power of attorney. Why me, if you wanted nothing to do with family?" The pain in James's voice was raw, surprising Elena with its authenticity. This wasn't the calculated manipulator they had been battling. This was a wounded man seeking answers. David's expression softened with understanding. "Your father hurt me badly. Business deal gone wrong. Took everything. When he left your mother, I tried to help. She refused. Said I reminded her of him." "She never told me that," James said quietly. "She just said you abandoned us like Dad did." "Never abandoned," David corrected. "Respected her wishes. Watched from distance. College fund. Who did you think provided that?" James looked up sharply. "That was you? Mom said it was a scholarship." David nodded. "Let her say that. Her pride, important to her. But why make me your emergency contact? Why not tell me?" "Tried once, 10 years ago. You were starting your career. Sent letter, invitation to dinner. No response." James's face registered shock, then a dawning recognition. "That wasn't a scam? I thought there had been people trying to reach me claiming to be long-lost relatives looking for money. I assumed." "No scam," David said simply. "Just old man, hoping to reconnect. After rejection, made you emergency contact anyway. Only family left." The room fell silent except for Max's soft breathing as he rested his head on David's knee, somehow sensing the importance of this moment. "I didn't know," James finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All this time, fighting you, thinking you were mentally compromised or being manipulated. I never considered there might be another explanation." "Not too late," David offered, extending his hand across the table. "To start again, properly this time." Elena watched as James hesitated, then reached out to take his uncle's hand. Something shifted in the room, not a magical resolution of all hurts, but a beginning, a crack in the wall of misunderstanding that had separated them for so long. When they left the library, James walked with them to Elena's car, his body language noticeably more relaxed. Max, who had maintained a polite but watchful distance from James throughout the meeting, surprised everyone by approaching him and gently nudging his hand. "He's something special, isn't he?" James acknowledged, cautiously petting the dog's head. "I can see why you fought so hard to keep him." "Not just Max," David said, glancing at Elena with warm appreciation. "Found family, worth fighting for, In the weeks that followed, a tentative peace was established. James withdrew his legal challenges and began making occasional visits to the apartment, each one less strained than the last. He brought old family photographs that filled gaps in David's narrative, sparking conversations that helped Elena understand both men better. Summer faded into autumn, marking 6 months since Max had first appeared at the hospital entrance. David's recovery continued to exceed expectations, though his doctors confirmed he would likely always have some left-side weakness and occasional word-finding difficulties. Neither limitation seemed to diminish his enjoyment of life or his growing involvement in Elena's world. On a crisp October morning, Elena took her coffee to the balcony where David was already seated with Max, watching birds at the feeder he had installed. "I've been thinking," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "My lease is up for renewal next month." David nodded, waiting for her to continue. "This apartment has worked for our temporary arrangement, but it's not ideal long-term. The elevator breaks down too often, and the bathroom is too small for proper accessibility modifications." "You want to find somewhere else?" David asked carefully, his eyes searching her face. "I was thinking we might look for a small house, something with a garden for your plants and a yard for Max. Something that could be properly modified for your needs." She took a deep breath. "Something that could be ours, not just mine where you're staying." David's face broke into a radiant smile, years dropping away from his expression. "A home for our family." Max, as if understanding the significance of the moment, rose from his spot and moved to stand between them, his tail sweeping in joyful arcs as he looked from one to the other. Elena reached out, taking David's hand in hers while her other hand rested on Max's warm fur. "For our family," she agreed, the words feeling utterly right. As the morning sun bathed them in golden light, Elena marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. A loyal dog's daily vigil, a doctor's curiosity, an old man's resilience, separate threads woven together by chance and choice into something beautiful and unexpected. Max had come to the hospital searching for his person, but in the process, he had helped Elena find herself and David reclaim his life. He had shown them all the extraordinary power of unconditional love and unwavering loyalty, reminding them that family isn't always defined by blood, but by who stands beside you when it matters most. Some might call it coincidence, the precise alignment of circumstances that brought them together. But as Elena looked at David's contented face and felt Max's steady presence against her leg, she preferred to think of it as something more meaningful, a reminder that even in our most vulnerable moments, connection and compassion can transform everything, creating family where once there was only loneliness, and building a home where love can flourish, one faithful day at a time.